Hey everybody, welcome to the GMI Rocket Show. I'm your host, Roman Zelichenko, and today is episode number 126. I am the founder of Laborless, an immigration tech company that automates H-1B visa compliance, and also the founder of GMI Rocket, which is a digital marketing agency focused on the immigration and global mobility industry, and of course, which brings you this show. So today's episode is a really exciting one, because we're talking to two co-founders of a company called Gale. So our guests today are Rahul Gudise and his co-founder Rishabh Sambare. They have a third co-founder who we'll bring up and talk about in the show, but who isn't on it. Just too many cooks in the kitchen. We want to make this a great conversation. So they do have a third co-founder, and Rahul, Rishabh, and their third co-founder are the founders of Gale, which is very excitingly an AI-based immigration tech platform that, at least for now, is focused on H-1B visas, which, like, come on, that's music to my ears. I love to hear technology built around the H-1B. So we're going to talk about their backgrounds and how they met at university and came up with this idea behind Gale, and obviously what the company does today, and where it's going in the future. And I think it's going to be really exciting. I'm going to learn a lot too, since especially because we're both focusing on the H-1B visa, at least for now. Before we get started, I do want to give a big shout out and a big thank you to the main sponsor of this episode, DocketWise. DocketWise, for all those who may not know, is an all-in-one immigration case management system it's owned by it's part of the MyCase family, under the Affinipay umbrella. So a lot of really great tech companies, immigration and legal tech companies under one roof there. DocketWise provides really great immigration forms, which is really what they're known for best and where they started. Really customizable questionnaires, industry-leading integrations, including with Laborless, with our product. Really great customer service. One of the things I always mention that I love about DocketWise as well is they provide a lot of great content for the industry. So they have a podcast of their own. They have a great blog. They have an ebook that they've come out with, etc. And they support things like this show that hopefully provides value to the industry. So thank you to DocketWise. Check out the link to them in the bio here. And if not, go to www.docketwise.com and let them know you heard about them from the GMI Rocket Show. Okay, without further ado, I want to bring up our guests, Rishabh, Rahul. Thank you guys so much for being here. And I'm super pumped to talk to you guys, learn about your stories, and of course about Gale.
Yeah, good to have us on. So thank you so much, Roman.
Yeah, thanks.
Of course. So, I know with co-founders, and like I said, I know you have a third co-founder. Now I'm thinking maybe I should have had all three of you on, but in an hour, we need 2 hours for that kind of for an awesome conversation there. So what I really love to do is, kind of get to know the guests first and dive into your backgrounds a little bit, just so people can get a little bit of understanding of, where you're coming from and what your situation has been in terms of studies and all that. And then we can get to, what Gale is. So, Rishabh, if it's okay, I'll start with you. Just out of curiosity, I love to ask this question, but when you're a kid, and this is coming from somebody who was not like this at all. I'm always wondering about the guests. Would you define yourself more as like, a very studious child where you're always, you're studying, you're in the books, etc., or was it ever like tinkering, entrepreneurship, and this, selling baseball cards, like stuff, lemonade stands,
I was probably the first one, way more than the second one. I was like very much so a studious kid. I probably, if you ask my parents, did not have a single entrepreneurial bone in my body. I remember, like, my mom likes to bring this up a lot. Like, they would buy me Legos, and then I would just sit there and watch my mom put the Legos together, because I just had no inclination to actually build anything as a kid. So for me, like, I think the way that I got into entrepreneurship was really a systematic, progressive way of like understanding that there were things about, like, my initial path was academia. I wanted to go into academia. I wanted to be a professor. I just slowly became a little bit more disenfranchised with it. And I started to look at like the opportunity cost of just an entire career outside of that space. And I think over time, I slowly realized that a lot of my general pragmatism was probably closer aligned to entrepreneurship than I initially thought. And so that was sort of how I ended up down this road.
So when you say your general pragmatism, was it because you put a lot of value on, doing something with your time that impacts others or that creates like a thing, whether it's a handheld thing or the digital thing? Like what was that pragmatism that sort of ended up driving you ultimately in this direction?
I think so. Yeah. Like it's that. And it's also just, if you look at a lot of the ways that you can progress in academia, at least in my perspective, a lot of it seemed to have been like coming up with problems that are solvable and then going in and writing papers about them and trying to solve them so you can get published, right? It just seemed like it was another rat race, which didn't necessarily have the same like yield as just, at least going into industry with like a regular 9 to 5 or like going into industry with like down an entrepreneurial path, right? It just didn't make sense to, I think, go down a rat race, which for me, I think I also realized I just wasn't as passionate about like the depths of like pure math as I initially suspected.
Yeah, because I was going to ask. I mean, I know all of you guys, you went to the University of Waterloo, and we'll get there in a moment, but you were the one who studied mathematics. You didn't really study.
Oh, no, that was Haokun. I did study computer science.
Oh, okay, you studied
but
computer
I did
science.
also study a lot of math as well. I initially like was sort of planning for both, and then as I realized that I wanted to lean more entrepreneurial, I stayed in computer science. And I
see.
stopped some of the math stuff.
So that was going to be your initial, your academic path was going to go down like the hard math.
Yeah, the hard math, and then eventually like hard CS, and then I was like, okay, this is just perhaps not the best use of my time.
So, okay, so from the perspective of entrepreneurship, anybody in your family, I mean, were you around your parents or uncles or like anybody close to you that ever owned a business? I mean, was that ever part of your kind of life at all in any way?
Like, my parents always had like side businesses, and I had a very close family friend whose dad owned a very successful short-term rentals agency, I think. But those never really affected my worldview, I think, nearly as much as when I started working with Haokun and Rahul on immigration-based like startups in Canada. I think entrepreneurship can be a very incremental thing, right? Like you see something grow, you build an MVP, you slowly productionize it, and I think that way it's very like just that incremental nature of it is very very attractive to like I think like a very primitive part of your human psyche, as opposed to like sitting there like trying to figure out the solution to a somewhat hard problem and then like sort of bashing your head against the wall, making like very little progress on it. So I think I was drawn to the incremental nature of it. I was drawn to the collaborative nature of it because I was with Rahul and Haokun, of course. And I think that was when the pragmatic part of my head was like, okay, let's just do this instead.
Got it. So, okay. So the path was obviously always going to be, at least at the time, finish high school, go to college and, pursue the academic path until you've met them. And obviously, again, you went to University of Waterloo. Yes. Now, it's a separate question before Rahul, I move on to you. Just, Rishabh, your family, do you have at this point any connection to or relationship with the immigration process? Again, whether it's something personal or maybe your parents talking about it, like did that ever enter your discussions or your psyche, as you said, as you were younger? Like I think like if it comes to U.S. immigration, I probably knew a disproportionate amount relative to my age at like 20, 21, just because like I'd heard a lot about my parents initially immigrated to the U.S. before I was born, but also when I was born. But they were like in and out of U.S. immigration, and they just told me a lot about how like the H-1B worked back in like 2000, how it's working now. I learned a lot about how like it's very hard for Indian-born nationals to get permanent residency in the United States because of the country caps. And then I also learned a lot about how I would, because I did intern at like at Tesla, Rahul interned at NVIDIA, and I initially planned to gain permanent residency in the United States through like employment. It was like my goal, right? Was to go down like a TN H-1B green card path, which is like standard for Canadians. So in that sense, I sort of like knew a fair bit about like employment-based pathways into the United States. I think a bit more than like the average person at the University of Waterloo tends to care for it. Like for example, one thing that I think was interesting is that if you have a math degree, or if you get at the University of Waterloo, you can get a bachelor's of mathematics or a bachelor's of. Oh, can you still hear me? Yep.
Oh yeah, or a bachelor's of computer science, and if you get the bachelor's of mathematics in computer science, you actually have a much harder, you can have a much harder time at the border trying to get a TN visa. So there were just like little things like this that I knew about because I wanted to be on top of my own immigration pathways.
Got it. So yeah, that's interesting. So and it's actually cool that your parents talked about it with you and sort of, you know, probably in a sense prepared you for it, because maybe the thought was, especially since you were getting internships in the US, you know, hey, here's the reality and here's what you may expect. And so do with this information what you will, but at least have it.
Yeah, I will say I wasn't born in India, so I'm not going to have the same issues when it comes to like residency, but they told me about their stories at least. And so I learned a lot about the system that way.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll take a pause here, Rishabh, and I want to turn to you, Rahul. Thank you for patiently waiting and listening to your co-founder here. So, you know, Rahul, I guess again, I'll start with the same question for you. You know, in terms of like when you're younger, lemonade stand, you know, baseball card sales, or were you kind of like, studying and school and that was really the path that was laid before you?
Yeah, I'd say definitely closer like the studying kind of angle of things. I will say though that, you know, um, my kind of path towards entrepreneurship is mainly credited to like my dad. And not that he would always push me to go do it. It's more so just like he was very like he just had a very like bleak view of being like formally employed. Like, you know, he works like a pretty good job as like a bank, like at a bank, right? Like as a software person. But you know, it's a very corporate type of structure. And so he always pushed me like, you know, at least go and explore what else there has to, you know, you're like a smart kid, you can go off and do whatever, but like at least explore, take risks when you're younger. So that kind of pushed me to when I was in high school-ish to I would try and resell sneakers and like Pokemon cards, but for the most part, it never really went that much. I never really made too much money off of it. And then I kind of feel that I understood what he was talking about a little bit more when I was working at, you know, my large tech job. Like for the most part, if you were to ask me like first year university, like what the end goal would be, it'd be to get a job at a company like Tesla or Nvidia, right? And so when I was working at those jobs, it was just really strange because I didn't feel that level of fulfillment anymore. And so that eventually was kind of the thing which led me down to, hey, like once if I start my own thing. And yeah, I guess now we're here.
Nevertheless, I mean, hey, you sold
Yeah.
the Pokemon cards, and I mean that,
Yeah.
and you made some money, you know. And I like to ask this question because I always reflect on my life when I hear what other people have done,
Yeah.
especially when they're younger. And I think about, you know, I was the same kind of. School was always the thing that I focused on. I always assumed that my professional life would be revolved around the thing I graduate with and the job that I get, and growing in
Yeah.
that job. But at the same time, like actually, Rishabh, you brought up that point about Legos, and it reminded me. I love Legos. I had a whole bunch of Legos, but I probably did build them correctly, but I definitely have distinct memories of just looking at the pieces, being like, I don't care. Like I know what the ultimate result will be if I build this thing that the booklet is telling me to build, because I see the picture on the box. And for some people, I think, understandably, that's the excitement. Like, here are a bunch of components. There's the end result. Here are instructions. Let's, you know, figure it out. I was like, yeah, I don't care. I already know what that end result is going to look like. I'm not interested in it anymore. I want to be surprised. So let's see what I can figure out and cobble together. And like, I never built anything super fascinating, but you know, I let my imagination kind of run with it. And it made me think about how cool Legos are, not just in terms of, you know, kids having fun, but also like an indicator of what a child's maybe their tendencies may be, right? Where you were like, I don't even want to forget about building something that's made up. I don't want to build anything, but I want to watch
basically.
you build it. And I want to and I'm sure you were, you know, and if you watched it, you were probably interested, like, how is my mom making these decisions? And like, I'm sure you were gaining some information about it that way. That was interesting to you. I never heard of that aspect before. So it made me realize like how cool of, you know, Legos are so popular. So how cool of a toy they are for kids. So yeah. So Rahul, I think it's very cool that, you know, you did that too. So kind of you dabbled a little bit there. So, okay. So you did that. Obviously you went into university also studying computer science. Did you also think about going into academia, or was it really, you know, like you said, corporate America, you know, presumably maybe corporate Canada, get a job and sort of move up that way?
Yeah, I think for me, it was mainly just I didn't have the ambition to go and become a professor or anything like that. I mainly just wanted to, for the most part, I was actually okay with like a 9 to 5, just go, you'd go into work, you'd do your thing, and then you'd leave, and then, you'd be able to spend the rest of your day however you wanted, right? So that was kind of my goal, is just to go work at some big tech companies, so like Google or Meta or something like that. And for me, most part, that was pretty much the end, and that's kind of how I was thinking about things until maybe like the third year of university, when I started to realize like I just didn't really enjoy those like 8 hours I was putting in every day.
And now both of you guys had internships, I guess, in the U.S., right?
Yeah, yeah.
During
So
college. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I worked at me and Richard both worked at Tesla, and then I went to go work for Nvidia for a bit, and then that's kind of when I was like, decided that I didn't really want to spend that much more time doing that.
And I understand that your third co-founder, Haokun, I know he's not with us right now on this call. Also a fellow University of Waterloo, grad, and I guess you guys met at school. Do you know? I mean, I know he's not here, so not to speak for him, but was he also, like, you guys were friends? So were you all thinking about the same kind of thing? Let's all get these great jobs, maybe all in Silicon Valley or kind of the Bay Area, and that's the goal, right? I mean, initially.
Yeah, I mean, so I pretty much lived with Falcon the entirety of our university kind of like career, right? So, yeah, for the most part, it was he wanted to go to big tech as well, and then I think he was probably the first one to be like, I really don't want to do that, around maybe second-ish year, and then yeah, it just kind of all started to fall into place after that.
When I studied, I got 2 bachelor's degrees, partly because
Hmm.
I took a victory lap in undergrad.
Hmm.
And my first degree was in financial economics, and like all my internships in college were at investment banks in New York. And
Yeah,
similar to you guys, like, I went to math school when I was a kid. I was always like getting 99s in math because that's what the Russian community,
yeah,
like the Soviet parents are like, you better know your math, dude.
yeah.
I'm sure. I don't know if it's the same in the Indian community, but I know we
It
had
is,
like
yeah.
Yeah.
Indian math schools around here too. Different parts of the city. So, it was always do that, go into finance and kind of grow your career there. And I did internship, I had great internships. I really love them and I'm really grateful for them in college. And I guess similarly, I kind of was like, okay, I maybe I idealize it in my head a little bit. And once you start doing the 9 to 5, even for a couple months in the summer, you realize, all right, this is just what it's going to be like, except for
Yeah.
an extended period of time. And I think, because again, I also never thought about, I never had the confidence to build a business. Like, who am I, to start a business? You have to
Yeah.
be a genius, or I don't know, whatever. Um, and so to your point about like these incremental steps, I think the first step potentially, before you even start thinking about, the product and all this stuff, is figuring out that the path you're currently on may not be the right path for you.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes you just have to have that experience first. And so I always used to tell like students in undergrad, and I went to law school afterwards, so that too, get as many internships as you can, because the likelihood of you finding the perfect thing is slim. Instead, you're likely to find out what you don't want to do, and that process of elimination is really important to having a fulfilling career, I think.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you guys had a similar kind of path. So okay, so you guys, great internships, in the U.S. I'm assuming you had to deal with some visa,
Yeah.
processing there, coming from Canada and studying in the U.S., right? Whether it's a TN visa or a J1 or whatever it might be, B1, B2, depending on what your situation was. But at this point, you're not thinking of immigration as a business. This is just something you're going through. So what was that moment where you guys started to say together, like, all right, we're all sort of going down the same path. We're all also sort of thinking we don't want to go down this path. And then you start brainstorming. What were some of those early conversations about, where to take your careers after graduation, whether it's entrepreneurship or something else? What were you guys thinking about and talking about at that point?
Yeah, so initially, it was me and Haokun, right? Because we were living together, so we were like together, like, okay, let's try and do something, right? I really don't want to do a 9 to 5 after I graduate. So we were thinking, the issue is when you're a not high school, like a university student, right? You haven't really lived that much of your life, and so you're like, there's no real profound ideas that you can have, right? All the ideas that you would mainly come up with are like super generic, like I'm going to build the next Facebook or something like that, right? Or some like mental health app. And so, yeah, we just wanted to have like a real think about what we actually wanted to build. And so realistically, we just went through things that we thought were, you know, that were annoying in our lives, right? And things that could be changed with the new, like, new progressions in like technology, right? So this is around like when ChatGPT came out and, AI started to kind of move off and started to become better and better at a much faster rate than anyone could have predicted, right? So I think it was at that point we started seeing like, hey, where can we leverage AI to make a meaningful kind of impact, right? And I mean, we didn't initially land on this. We wanted to, so we're all Canadian, right? So me, Rishabh, and Haokun, we're all Canadian. And we know a lot of people who went through the Canadian immigration process, right? And so we said, like, let's look there. So we talked to a lot of lawyers about Canadian immigration. And I guess, Rishabh, you want to go tell them a bit about what we built?
Yeah, so Canadian immigration is interesting because they use a form format called XFA, and they use it as like a more difficult form of XFA called dynamic XFA. And what that means is that you have a PDF, right? Like all immigration forms are PDFs nowadays, or before as well. And the Adobe the reason you can only open some of these forms in Adobe Acrobat is because Adobe Acrobat has a special like JavaScript runtime inside of it, which is like running code, which is inside the PDF. So it's kind of like a browser that way, right? You open up this form, there's code inside it, and Adobe has a special program which was closed source until 2017, 2019, I think. Like no one else really had access to even the specifications for this program, right? To be able to open and interact with the form. And so what you saw was that like as Canadian immigration numbers grew, especially like in the last administration, there were a lot of lawyers and immigration consultants who were looking for form automations. I think you interviewed the Visto AI people quite a while ago on this podcast. They probably had the same problem, and they looked to try and automate it as well. So when we looked at the space of Canadian immigration form fillers, we were like, okay, this doesn't really seem like it's working. Like a lot of the ones that we tried were async. So like we would request them to fill out the form in a certain format, and then they would come back like I think 24 hours later, and they would fill it out for us. And so we weren't actually convinced that this was a program that was filling out the form for us, if that makes sense, right? Because it's very difficult to fill out that form because there wasn't really a way to replicate what Adobe had done in their closed source program, right? So what we did was we figured out a way to replicate enough of what they'd done to edit the forms in a replicable way. So like we would sort of one-to-one match what they had done, right? And we did this like through examining what they eventually had to open source because they got sued, I think, or because they deprecated the format or something like that, which they open sourced, I think, like 2019. There's like this 1,600-page document about XFA and how to render it and how to interact with it. And it's a very it's a piece of shit. It really is. It's a piece of work, that document. But we implemented just enough of it to be able to like interact with to be able to fill out these forms programmatically. And so that was like sort of our first offering to the Canadian immigration space. And there were a lot of interested people for sure. I think Rahul can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I mean, like, again, like we were systematically going out and talking to people, right? So I think it was actually at like the Collision conference in 2024. I think I remember going and like finding anyone who I thought was a lawyer and talking to them because we thought that, law was a really cool space to kind of try and innovate in, right? So we talked to a lot of immigration people, and it felt like they all had the same bottleneck, right? Which was, I need these forms to be filled out faster, right? And so, yeah, that was kind of our initial offering. We got a couple of customers with that kind of product. And then, yeah, we decided to kind of steer away from it for a couple of different reasons, which I can go into if that's interesting. But like, that's typically how it kind of came out. It's very systematic. It's not like a divine intervention told us like, you need to go and build this H-1B type thing, right?
And I want to say respect to you guys for sort of having that self-awareness to say, we're going to have good ideas, but those ideas fundamentally are not likely to be based on some really moving life experience, only just factually, like you just practically haven't had it as many life experiences as somebody who's, as you said, just been around, has lived longer, you know. And I think that's really self-aware. And I say that like with all due respect to every, you know, entrepreneur who starts something in university, because there people do build really amazing things, but sometimes people like really fall in love with their own ideas and think like, I'm going to solve the biggest problem in the world. But, you know, they don't realize that maybe they haven't really seen as much as they could about that problem, or maybe there are other big problems. So I think ego plays a role sometimes in entrepreneurship. I mean, I don't know if you guys have seen that around. And so I think it's really respectable and really inspiring, frankly, to see you guys saying like, you know, let's look at some ideas that we can solve, but recognize that we're going to have to pull in the experiences of a lot of other people to determine really what the problem truly is and how we can solve it. So that's super cool. Collision's an amazing conference. I've been once, and I think it was 2022, maybe. I went maybe 2023. Huge conference in that big arena in Toronto, and it was a lot of fun. I mean, comparing that to immigration conferences, which I love because I go to them all year, it's a world of a difference. I mean, it's like 15, 20,000 people. It's, you know, the speakers are like Gary Kasparov we had, for example, and others. Yeah. Okay, so you got started, and that's cool. So it makes a lot of sense. You're in Canada. You have some understanding of immigration. You don't have an understanding necessarily of inbound immigration, but you know people who do. University of Waterloo is a great school, and so you're going to have probably a lot of foreign students who maybe they talk to you about it. And you know, I guess your parents, Rishabh, sounds like they immigrated to Canada. Rahul, is the same with you? Your family, also immigrated?
Yeah, they were. Both my parents were born in India, and then they moved to Canada. A little bit more linear than Rishabh's parents, but yeah.
And I didn't really ask you this earlier, but I mean, was there also situations where kind of, you know, your parents talked about this a little bit, you know, to any extent where, you know, you knew about what it was like for them to immigrate and pick up their lives, you know, establish themselves in Canada?
Yeah, I think they mainly just talked about it from the context of like, you know, the difficulties of being an immigrant, right? Like they came to Canada in like, I think it was like 1990, like, so it was very, very, like it was a while ago, right? So in general, like that's kind of what they talked about, but not so much like the practical thing of, you know, how do you actually immigrate? More so just how hard it is to establish yourself in a country which is completely foreign to you. Yeah.
Which, by the way, is a big reason that immigration lawyers and the service providers, like the technology companies that service them, do what we do, because it is hard to establish yourself as a new immigrant. And so let's make the process of immigrating as pain-free as possible, because that's the first step in a long road of just hurdles and challenges and you know, and all these things. Like, let's not make you want to turn around before you even get here type of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
So got it. So you guys, so you're working on this Canadian immigration platform. It sounds like you had a couple of clients. Did you actually release something and service those clients at all?
Yeah, we actually had a running deployment. So I think we had about 3 to 5 customers, and they would pretty much use it exclusively for their own internal thing. So like we would do the intake, so they would go to the platform, do the intake. So the tech that we built out would essentially auto generate those forms. So typically most of the solutions we found took about 24 hours. Like we could do it on the spot. So like
it's like demand. Very similar to what DocketWise does in the States. It's just harder to do that on demand in Canada for the reason that
just because of like the tech aspect of it. But yeah, we were able to build from what I understand to be like one of the first versions to do it on demand. And yeah, like we had a couple of people who were using it pretty religiously because it would be much faster and easier to use than a lot of the other kind of solutions out there at the time.
Were they paying clients, by the way?
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. So from day one, you had paying clients, basically.
Yeah, I think, you know, we had different ideas before that, right? And I think each time that we failed on an idea, we learned something important that we would apply to the next one. And the idea, the most important thing was build something which people wanted, right? I know it sounds super obvious. It's like, of course you're going to do that because then no one would buy your product. But it's a little bit hard for someone who's getting into entrepreneurship because you just think that the ideas that you come up with like you can come up with some logical reason as to why people want them, but realistically, if you haven't gone out there, validated it, and seen someone say like, or not even say like, see someone actually do something which would help you understand that that is something real, then it's not really a like a signal, right? So that was kind of the issue with one of our previous ideas. Is we built something for like 4 months, no one wanted it, and then we realized that after. But this time we didn't build anything until we had someone saying like, "Hey, what's your like how do I wire you the money?" type of thing, right? So yeah, that's kind of like the lesson with that, I guess.
Yeah, that's a great lesson. And by the way, when you're first getting started with whatever business, money is also an uncomfortable thing to ask for.
Exactly.
Especially if you're trying, you're charging somebody for a thing that you created, because you have to believe in it. I mean, you have to have the sort of self-confidence to say that I create a thing and it is worthy of someone else's hard-earned money. Like psychologically,
exactly.
that actually, it is a barrier. So it's very cool that you had some prior experiences there. It's a really great lesson. So you're doing that. You have some paid clients. You've got something in production. By the way, was it called Gale, or was it called something else?
I think
we called it like Inform initially because that's what I had to name the code repository. But then we quickly renamed it to Gale.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, makes sense. So you've got your Inform, or you've got your Gale product out there for Canada. And I know that now, obviously, you guys are based in the U.S. and I really want to talk about your experience with YC. But what was that moment that made you realize, like, okay, we're not just going to continue to get Canadian clients and build this out. We have to take some bigger steps, some leaps, perhaps, if you will. What was the moment where that shifted for you?
I think it was when we got into YC, or when we were talking about with our eventual YC group partner. So in general, for anyone who doesn't know, YC is it's a startup accelerator. It's one of the bigger ones. They produce companies like DoorDash and was DoorDash one?
Airbnb.
Airbnb is probably and like Reddit, like those type of companies, really large companies. And so like we were talking about like getting into Y Combinator, right? And I think it's like a twofold type of thing, right? When you want to go and actually get venture funding, so this is like you'll have some investor give you money, necessarily by the mechanisms of that the way that their returns work. Their returns essentially need huge markets, right? Like large markets. And in their view, Canada is a small market. So it not to say that we didn't want to work in Canada. It's just like, we wanted to be able to build something large, right? We wanted to build something like a bit bigger. And so we decided to tackle the American market. And, that would also help us get venture funding so that we can create something that we can scale. Like we can go hire people, we can go buy stuff, which will help us kind of move faster. And so it was kind of twofold. We were like, I think we wanted to kind of go into the American market. I think all of our parents, like we also thought that it might be something that we wanted to do is eventually become immigrants to America ourselves. So we just decided that I think that this would be a good decision for the business overall. And so
Before we move forward, because what I really want to hear about is your experience in YC. I think you're being very modest. I mean, YC is definitely the most famous, and I would argue top 2, top 3 influential accelerators in the world. So, but before we do that, I do want to take a quick pause because I want to say thank you to one of the second sponsor of the show, which is CaseBlink. So CaseBlink is an AI platform, actually also working in U.S. immigration, taking a different approach from you guys. So CaseBlink was built by a technologist, an AI scientist, and an immigration attorney. And instead of focusing on a particular case type in terms of forms and such, they actually started with the writing-heavy forms and applications, specifically the EB2NIW, EB1, O1, and L1, helping automate parts of the reading, organizing, and assembling of documents, extracting data and summaries from documents, and ultimately drafting the really long letters and briefs that had to come be included in those cases. So Case Blank also, they've been on the show. They're great friends, and they also are VC backed, so they're having some of the same considerations as you guys and some other companies in the industry. And so they've been building something called the Studio feature, which helps immigration law firms use Case Blank to draft actually in their own style, rather than just what the Case Blank AI comes up with. And then ultimately they are rolling out forms and workflows to help law firms end to end. So for any immigration lawyers who are listening, especially who may work with EB2 NIWs, EB1s, and O1s, but maybe other case types as well, definitely check out Case Blank. You can check the link in the show notes or visit caseblank.com to check them out. So thank you to Case Blank as well for supporting the show. And that's the transition that I wanted to ask you. YC is a storied organization, like you mentioned, Coinbase and Airbnb and just hundreds and hundreds of other companies, many that are household names and many others that aren't, but are incredibly successful, have gone through there. What was that experience like for you? Because immigration law does not typically, find itself in places like YC. So what are some of the things that you guys pulled from there, having come out of this building something small, but obviously, profitable, or at the very least revenue generating in Canada, recognizing that you can open those doors and do something way bigger in a bigger market. Now you get into YC, amazing. What happens while you're there? What things did you learn? What shifts did it cause, in the company, within the team, within yourselves, et cetera?
Yeah, I think it was really interesting because, you wouldn't think something like immigration would be a big part of YC, right? But for the most part, a lot of the people there are immigrants in some way, right? Or immigrants or foreign to the United States at the very least, right? And so we just found that there was a lot of people there who could actually benefit from some of the basic things that we built out over, the next couple, or that we're currently building out, right? So, the context here is like startups, right? So these are startups. They honestly want to move fast. They want to be able to build stuff. They want to be able to test stuff out. And, when you're a startup founder, the last thing you really want to worry about is H-1B compliance, or what are my pathways going to be? Or I need to go flag down XYZ, find an immigration lawyer to kind of help me out. Right. And so we just found that it was pretty transformative in general, because there'd be a lot of people, there's a lot of misinformation as well, right? About what are pathways for someone, because advice, right? I mean, we're not able to give advice because we're not actually immigration lawyers, right? But in general, there'd be a lot of tribal knowledge which is passed around between founders, and oftentimes it's this advice was only something which was given to you because of your situation. It's not something which you can apply to this other person, right? And so we just found it to be a huge problem in general, and we found compliance specifically to be a huge problem. We kind of moved into the space thinking about how we actually wanted to make our mark in America, because in Canada it felt like there was a very clear thing that we could do, but in America we didn't really know what that was yet, right? And so I think it was pretty transformative in figuring out how we could actually provide value to people insofar as something that wasn't done before, right?
Rahul, what are some of your thoughts about YC and your experience there?
Yeah,
sorry, Rishabh. Sorry.
No.
Sorry.
I think I think the one thing that Y Combinator really helped us understand is where and how immigration can sit in a VC's mind, right? San Francisco in general is a very immigrant positive place. Probably the second next to New York, if not more than New York, right? At this point, I don't know, right? Obviously New York has Ellis Island and stuff, but I think that there's just so many people in San Francisco who are so inclined towards the immigration process, whether it's investors who personally feel very strongly about it, or even founders of very big companies who have been scarred by the process and things like that, right? That I think there's a lot of empathy towards anyone trying to do anything in immigration, even if the market can be considered small compared to other markets that people generally go after in San Francisco. If you look at some of the if you look at some of the other YC companies that have come out of legal companies that have come out of YC, a lot of them are like general legal companies. Like there's one called Legora, for example, which is a very big like legal, I think, like research platform for like European lawyers for the most part, or like one that was in our batch called Case Flood. They tackle like the entire, like they treat legal as like a single entity, right? They don't necessarily like break it down by like law firm type, and if they do, immigration is usually not one that's considered. Mm-hmm. But I think that just because there's so much of an inclination towards the space in San Francisco, you can make immigration work as in VC funding as well, which was probably the most interesting thing that came out of YC for me.
And I would argue too. Well, first of all, you guys came in at a great time because, as you know, or I'm assuming you guys know, with the Trump administration, they changed the H-1B rules a little bit to allow for self-sponsorship for startup owners. Yeah. So now this has become a much more realistic option for YC members, right? The current or past, and honestly for the future too, with all the different batches. So yeah, I think that's a really cool aspect there, because not only do you see that large companies are feeling this, but folks, your peers at YC, they may feel it as well. So okay, so this makes all the sense in the world. Talk to me about Gale. What is Gale now, right? You came out of YC, you had this experience. I'm sure you progressed things quite a bit. You then have your pitch day right at the end of YC.
Yeah, demo day. Yeah.
Demo day. Sorry. What is Gale now, and like, what was the vision that you pitched, and sort of what can people expect if they want to check out Gale today?
Yeah. So what we're trying to build is, you can think of it as like immigration in a box, right? So in general, we're not a law firm, so we can't actually do the actual process of filing and representing people, right? But what we wanted to do was build tooling which could help modernize the process, right? Like, intake, also doing like basic compliance things. I know Laborless focuses a lot on like posting notices, like for like LCAs and stuff like that. But even, we would talk to people about, like compliance, just basic compliance for like H-1Bs, for example. If you were someone who, like, let's say you're an employer, you have this employee and they're remote, a lot of the times, if you're a large organization, someone might get promoted, right? And job duties change too far from what the original posting was. You may have to file amendments. So keeping track of all of that, especially at a startup scale, is really hard. And even at large companies, it's still really hard, right? And so what we wanted to do was kind of provide a way to streamline all of it, and like automate all of it, so that they can kind of rest assured that they are fully compliant, but also take a bit of stress off of them during like the basic, like actually process of getting the visa, right?
I think it's also important to say, like, the way that a lot of startups right now, at least, interface with immigration law firms after they get a visa, right, or after they get like their I-797, is it's a very like, they push based thing where they like, if there was an LCA amendment that needed to be filed, they would sort of need to recognize it, and then they'd have to go and talk to their lawyer again, right? There's no mechanism in place for the person with the actual expertise who understands when an LCA amendment needs to happen to really be there, right, when the amendment needs to happen, right? If that makes sense, right? Like the founder needs to go and engage the lawyer again once they sort of think that the amendment needs to be done, which is like not top of mind for like almost any startup founder. Like, let's be honest, they're not really thinking about this type of stuff. So I think there's a lot of room in like literally just like webhooks sent to your law firm, right? Like notifications being sent to your law firm whenever like a field in a payroll software changes, right? Something as simple as that, to just like give startup founders a bit more peace of mind, especially in the current administration, where they have started to increase site visits, right? So I think it's a lot of like, when we talk about compliance, we talk about like, we're talking a bit more about like a proactive approach to it, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And to your point, I mean, maybe at a bigger company where you have an HR person that's really knowledgeable, they can go in and tell the law firm, we need an amendment. But yeah, in the startup space, a founder that has an H-1B for themselves or for somebody else, they just don't know. They're not immigration experts. They've never experienced this. So yeah, that's a really good point. And the law firm wouldn't know necessarily either. Now they could check in or they could do periodic, whatever, but it's not the same.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really like that. I really like that perspective. And so knowing the things that you can look at that could potentially raise a flag to indicate, hey, checking in, did this just happen? Because if so, you may need an H-1B amendment. Could be very helpful, and to your point, ensure compliance. So who is your target client? I mean, who do you sell to? Because it doesn't sound like you sell to immigration lawyers, right?
Yeah, so mainly what we do is we coordinate with other immigration lawyers. So we have a lot of people in our network. And yeah, so in general, what we do is we try to sell more to startups, right? As you mentioned, right? Like larger companies, they tend to have HR people whose whole job is ensuring like compliance, or like global mobility people. And that's kind of their whole job, right? And they're pretty good at it. But again, for startups, there's really no one there who can do that. And so what we want to do is try and provide sort of the experience you would get with like either like a white glove type of firm, or like having your own dedicated HR person, and provide that to them in a way that is easy to integrate with their current systems, right? And so mainly what we're doing now is we're selling to startups, and kind of helping them throughout the whole process, and even after they get their approval.
And now, which system do you currently integrate, or are you able to integrate with different systems that startups are using, whether it's an HR system, payroll, etc.?
Yeah, so we are currently building them, but they're almost finished. So the systems that we're probably going to be using are like, Rippling, which is one that is commonly used with a lot of, like startups, but also things like Workday and like Greenhouse, all of those. So essentially building out integrations to where we can integrate with all of them, which are commonly used by startups. And then, yeah.
Yeah, like I think a lot of like especially like things like Rippling or like your payroll software is like the first place that it's like the first line where someone changes like their salary or whatever, mostly for tax reasons, right? Like they just need to keep that in mind for tax reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And so we think that that's probably the best place to just like if we can subscribe to field changes, right, in those
Mm-hmm.
and then your law firm also gets notified when that stuff changes. It's probably the most seamless way to do it.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that you partner with law firms. So the idea would be that the company, the startup, let's say in this case, comes to you guys. You help them with the H-1B from a technology standpoint, but then ultimately the filing, the representation, the G28 is through a partner law firm that the company gets, I guess, through your network. Do you connect them with somebody proactively,
Yes.
or do you give them a choice and they select one, or can they just come with their own law firm, for example?
Yeah, I mean, any of the following, right? Like a lot of times startup people, they're like, I can Google for immigration
Right.
lawyers, but it's just so hard to tell like who's
Right.
good, who's not good, right? So, we have we coordinate with a bunch of attorneys who are, veterans, so to speak, in like the YC community, but also just generally in the immigration field. And so if they have their own lawyer, that's completely fine. If they want some recommendations, we have a couple. It's ultimately up to them what they choose to do. But yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I'm just thinking about folks who are watching or listening. What could their relationship be with Gale? Obviously, for the startups, and I'm assuming if there's a smaller company, maybe not necessarily a startup, but that has H-1Bs that they hire, they can come to you guys as well.
Yeah.
And then a law firm. I mean, do you have any, demand for additional lawyers that might say, I love this, I love the business model, I'd love to work with you guys as additional counsel? Or do you keep your community of lawyers tight for now as you grow?
Yeah, I mean, definitely I think we've started to hit some level of issue in terms of having people always available to take on new cases, right? Sometimes we just immigration lawyers, there's the people that we coordinate with outside of like us, right? They're still like law firms and attorneys in their own right. So they still have case inbound from other places. And so sometimes they just get very full,
Busy.
right? And sometimes, and especially with like cap season, right? I mean, just kind of closing off. But also sometimes, there's a lot of attorneys that I know who are like, I mainly focus on like H-1Bs and like L visas. I don't really touch green cards or J-1s, right? And so expanding the network to kind of fit all of that. In particular, we're currently sourcing people to kind of help us out with like J visas and like other types of visas like that, more obscure types of visas. And so, yeah, I mean, always open to talk to people, see what they're kind of looking for. At the very least, it'd be super interesting to talk to them about like how they've helped their clients and like, how we can always improve the platform.
I'd like to also say that we. I'd just also like to say that we put a lot of effort into the contracts to make sure that your independence as an attorney is not being construed or anything. We've talked to a lot of ethics lawyers.
Yeah.
So, like, if you are interested, just know that you're good that way. If you're concerned.
We did spend a lot of money talking to some very expensive ethics lawyers about like, because there's a lot of, and rightfully so, there's a lot of lines drawn around like what is illegal, which is like fee sharing, right, which is heavily illegal, or like unethical. And so just being able to come up with like a formal legal structure to where it all kind of makes sense, to where they are able to represent the client and then we are able to help in a meaningful way, was hard, but I think it was definitely worth it in the end.
Yeah, and legal representation has to obviously come from the right parties. So unethical representation is or unethical practice, unlawful practice, all that.
Yeah.
And you kind of answered my question, because I was going to ask you, are you working on other types of visas? Do you have that in your product roadmap or your pipeline? Is that something that you guys are actively looking at as well?
Yes, I mean, we mainly work with startups, right? So maybe the types of visas which startups would commonly encounter. So like H-1B transfers, H-1Bs are pretty common. Sometimes Ls come up, but I would also say like intern visas. Like startups love to hire interns because it's a really good way for them to assess, is someone a good fit for full-time kind of employment? So like TNs, J1s are often very good. And so, yeah, we're trying to expand things in that kind of repertoire to better support the companies that we work with.
And I guess, one final kind of question I would ask here would be, maybe this is long term, but hey, you're a YC company, so the sky's the limit, right? U.S. big market, arguably the biggest immigration market. Are there thoughts or any conversation at all about, first of all, going back to Canada, and refocusing there, because there's cross-border stuff. There, U.S. companies have major offices in Canada, and they hire hundreds or thousands of people there. There's a lot, there's volume there, and then also going abroad. I mean, there are large markets, whether it's Germany or England or Australia or other parts of the world. Is there any thought about that, or is that kind of like, yes, at 100,000 foot level, but for now, let's tackle the U.S. and see how far we can go here?
I think at least with Canada, we're very open to going back, right? Like we're very open to possibly continuing like expanding operations there. I think for the EU and for a lot of countries in that area, at least like my very surface level understanding of like the EU is like if Canada wasn't like quote unquote a venture scale market, like I don't think any single country in the EU would be a venture scale market either, except maybe like Germany. To the point that I think, especially because there's so many of them, right, that you would have to build out a lot of tech to the point that's probably not worth. That's probably your 100,000 level, like you're like way later type look, right? I do think just because of like the fact that we're all Canadians, though, Canada is possibly more approachable at an earlier stage.
Yeah. And it's also just practically it's closer, culturally it's closer in many ways, from a business standpoint. That's really exciting. And I guess if I can ask you guys sort of not a product necessarily question, but do you ever think about like, hey, if I was to go back and redo this all and not go down the entrepreneurship route, do you think either of you guys would have, gone on to do something else outside of your original paths, but not necessarily entrepreneurship? Or are you guys, sort of this is the way we're going now, because it doesn't get easier from here; it only gets harder.
Not sure, honestly. I think for me, I feel like I would have always ended up in either this or software engineering. So something with building, I think is where I would have ended up anywhere. I guess Rishabh, I'm not sure if you have any.
I'd probably end up in like some like indie hacking spaces, making like courses, or maybe actually building products. I don't know, something like that. I like talking about programming languages, so maybe that would be where I ended up.
I was gonna say you would be like the perfect co-founder for something like Twitch, just because I love the story of like you take the Legos and I want to watch you build them. I mean, that's a perfect use case for Twitch, where you watch people play video games and do all sorts of stuff, and it's super fun that way. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate this conversation. It's been really fun. Really exciting path that you guys have taken so far, and it's really I'm looking forward to watching you grow and everything. And definitely for folks who are watching and listening, check out it's galevisa.com, GALE visa.com. Just to learn more about what you guys are doing. If you're law firms, reach out if you want to work with them. And obviously, if you are startup founders, especially, or startups, and you have some H-1B needs, and it sounds like other needs that you might potentially have for startup interns or whatnot, reach out to Gale as well. Helping startups is always the way to go. So thank you, Rishabh. Thank you, Rahul. I think you guys are on the way to something big, and I wish you guys all the best. So appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks for having us on.
Yeah, thanks, Roman.
Thank you.
Awesome. What a great conversation here. I didn't even get a chance to do this, but we had Michael Brunman here say, good luck, guys. Thank you, Roman, for organizing. So, Michael, thank you so much for the comment. Just want to say a quick thank you once again to DocketWise. As I mentioned at the top of the episode, DocketWise is an all-in-one immigration case management platform with best-in-class immigration forms, customizable questionnaires, tons of industry-leading integrations, great customer service, lots and lots of good content. If you're a lawyer and you want to expand from business work into some family-based stuff, or you want to dabble in litigation, or you want to get into business immigration, check out DocketWise. They have a lot of good information and content to help you get started with that as well. And of course, they are big supporters of the show, and I'm really grateful for them for allowing me to make this happen. So check them out, www.docketwise.com, or visit the link in the show notes. So thanks, everybody. I hope you liked this episode. Super pumped for more H-1B technology coming down the pike. See you all next week for another episode of the GMI Rocket Show. And in the meantime, have a wonderful weekend and peace out.